In this video, we'll talk about the difference between questioning and doubting things. Because as we go into chasing purpose, into fulfilling purpose, or into moving forward, right, in any vision, there's going to come a point where we can't really look down and we got to look forward. And if we keep looking down, we won't be able to make, insightful decisions. Let's leave it at that. I just had a conversation recently, and it was about pretty much after I posted about purpose, where I was asked, "Hey, like, do you believe that purpose is something that progresses?" And the interesting part about that conversation was that it made me realize that yes, it's true. Like I forgot to something that I didn't discuss in the other video that I just posted, but purpose, the reason why we are here, really can be defined, and we can start with what is fundamentally true, right? But some things are true today and they're not true tomorrow, or they weren't true yesterday, right? For example, maybe you're the firstborn of a family, and maybe a few years later, now you were an older brother, but you weren't before, right? Maybe today you're single, and in a few years you're married. Now you're a husband, you're a wife. That's now a connection that you have to somebody that gives meaning to the suffering, right? Because no matter which role you play, there will be a sense of suffering. And so every day there's a new question, right? Such as, what does that role mean? And then on an individual basis, we got to sit there and think and be honest about our perspectives and what they entail. And that's the scary part. That's why we don't want to do it, because our ego loses control when we do that. When we don't try to control what it means, right? To please an exterior validation, we get stuck with what we actually believe. And that's scary because there's no control in that. And it's important to understand that there is such a thing, right? If you made a list today of all the things that you are, there's probably even more things that you're not even aware of. But if you let go, you can become all of those things. And that, when you surrender to them, guides our life. But purpose, right? By definition, if you believe you have purpose, it means there's a bigger thing at play, something that we don't control. And every day we can reassess, what do those things mean? That means we can question the things, right? I've noticed that sometimes we don't like this idea. First, because we don't have control over it. I noticed that for myself. For a long time, I used to think that it had to be something else. Like it had to be something more flamboyant, something more like, like you see online or something like that. As I would do it, I'd feel an excitement, and people would tell me, and I'd get a feeling, blah, 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 blah. But I realized that that's actually evil. That's actually selfish of me, because I was actually using just that vehicle in order to try and fulfill other needs, right? Needs that were more selfish rather than the other ones, the ones that we spoke about, the things that are fundamental, basic, that we take for granted sometimes, like being a son, a father, a husband, a dad, whatever. Sometimes we take those roles for granted, and we don't want to look at them as being a purpose. But they are things that give connection to meaning to the suffering, and they serve other people. Our suffering in those circumstances allows for that connection to be, for the structure and things to make sense. If those connections don't exist, right, then the whole situation you experience with the people around you becomes weird. If the person that you're having lunch with isn't your friend, if you're not a friend to them, for example, right, do you imagine how wildly different that experience is? If if that connection you have with the woman in your life, for example, and is not that, that warm thing, and they were a stranger, you see how completely different that would be, and we underestimate how much that can have value or impact in our lives. But I noticed that sometimes we go online and we see everybody else doing all this other stuff, and we think it must feel like what it looks like. But I think that is evil, because we're trying to serve ourselves in those points. We're not trying to, we don't think about other people. But I think if we can't see meaning, or we can't see purpose, right, in those things, the ones where of the most fundamental things, then how are we going to see them in anything else? If those things are true, right, before you're an employee at this company, before you're that, you're this or that, before all that, at the foundation, you were this list of things, and you liked these hobbies, for example, right? Writing, drawing, photography, I don't know, running. If that's what composes your foundation, and you stop and you don't value that, then how can anything build from there, right? So the point is that you can question the roles. You can say, what does it mean to be a father at 25 compared to being a father at 63? What do those things entail? Being an older brother at today is different than tomorrow, and every day we can look at those things again and again. But the hardest part, I think, is just to let go of what we want that to be, or how we try to control that. And doubting though is completely different. Doubting is sort of like asking, maybe the game is different, maybe this is not actually true, and that's completely different. To question is to say, like, am I doing this right? Question remains within the game. Doubt is to say, maybe the game is different, maybe it's something else. That difference makes us understand that to doubt is pointless. We're already running. We're already inside the plane, right? After the plane takes off, and we're in flight. It's too late to doubt now. Can the plane fly? It's flying now. So if we agree that some things are true, we say, okay, this is who I am, boom, 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 and I make a list. Then if I start with that, and I've seen it to be true, and when I act with those things in mind, and I realize the amplitude of that, right? For example, I realize the responsibilities that come with those positions. I realize that I have people to take care of, that to a certain extent I'm responsible for. I realize that I do have a role to play in how I inspire these people, right? In the outcomes that they'll get based on my actions. What if I realize that I do play a role in a foundational way to the relationships outside of me, right? To the literal concepts around me. Now it no longer remains about me, it becomes about other people. And when I start to be more aware of that, I can see that right there is purpose. And maybe then along the way, we'll find something else. But I think that's the starting point. And that maybe when we turn towards like this serving ways to look into purpose, we're just looking into things to try to fill a void which shouldn't exist, or should just be embraced, and the attention should be put on what actually matters. And that void will always exist unless we put all that intention into things that matter. I think that's a great starting point. I think that's an important point also about the difference here between questioning and doubting. Question, sure. Am I playing this right? Doubt is a waste of time. You can spend years doubting. Countless people out there question who they are all the time. Doubt who they are. How can you be functional? It's literally a dysfunctional thing. You make the list, you stick to it. You don't have to look down, you don't have to look back to it. Simple. And every day you can just question it. That's it.